My name is Steven. I've been given a clean bill of health from my own doctor and from a psychologist. You see, I've always had trouble sleeping, though. And at 25 years old, I don't ever remember a time when I slept normally. As a teenager, sometimes I went 72 hours before sleeping. And since doctors could never find a reason for my insomnia, I've learned to deal with it as well as possible. Now I know you're wondering why I don't just take sleeping pills. Well, I went through the entire roster of medications, all prescription, to cure my insomnia. None worked for more than 7 days at a time. And it seems that after the 7th day on any medication, my body just says, no. Done with that one. It's not working anymore. The doctors don't understand that either, though several have put forth their own theories, none of which were solid. And after 3 years of chemical regimens, my family doctor suggested yoga and meditation to put me into a calm state throughout the day, and especially at night before bed. I practiced sporadically, and it seemed like a waste of time when I didn't see any results the first month. I'm a construction worker, so yoga and meditation aren't part of my hardwiring, I guess. I'd rather lift weights or work out in the evenings, and I know you shouldn't work out too close to bedtime, so I don't. Last year, my insomnia took a darker turn. I don't really believe in paranormal anything, and I used to mock people who did believe. Looking back, I was a real ass to some of my friends who tried to share their paranormal experiences. And one of the people I ragged the worst about his belief was my cousin Eddie. Being a year younger, Eddie has always been a close friend to me. We're the only 2 guys in a family of female cousins, so it was natural that we stuck together as we grew up. Eddie had 3 older sisters. His sisters were constantly playing with Ouija boards, tarot cards, runestones, weird books of supposed spells, and telling ghost stories that terrified Eddie as a youngster. And I always blamed his nervous behavior on his sisters. When we were teens, I really started giving Eddie hell about his ghost sightings and demon encounters. I never saw or heard anything paranormal, even when I tried. And everything I ever saw or heard was logically explained. You know, the wind, loose shutters, old water pipes, passing headlights that threw odd moving shadows on the wall. Nothing supernatural about any of my experiences. And in high school, Eddie went through a very bad phase with his encounters. He stopped sleeping and stayed over at my house 2 or 3 times a week. I worried that the other kids would shun him and make his high school life miserable if he didn't get over it, so I was a jerk when he tried to tell me what was going on. I wouldn't even let him finish most of his stories, and eventually, he stopped trying to tell me. And you know what? That was fine with me. At least the kids at school wouldn't think he was nuts. But that's not what happened. Eddie found someone who would listen to his stories, a friend who shared his own stories of terror, and they fed off of each other, I think, and their experiences got worse. And in Eddie's senior year, I was already working at a local factory. He and his friend had a falling out, and that friend shared all of Eddie's stories with some of the worst bullies in school. And for the remainder of his time in school, Eddie suffered their emotional abuse daily. He suffered a complete breakdown just after graduation, and his parents had him committed to the local psychiatric hospital where he spent 3 years. And during that time, we had very limited visitations with him, and I ended up getting a job with a big construction crew in town. Upon his release, Eddie was a shell of his former self. Hollow-eyed and gaunt, moving around like a zombie with this terrible, vacant expression. I hated seeing him like that. And his parents came to me about a year after Eddie's release and asked if he could stay with me for a while. Their house seemed to make his insomnia and paranoia worse. Of course, I took him in. Maybe I could help him by treating him just like a normal guy. And I planned to do all these things with him that guys go out and do together. Take him to bars to meet women, visit a couple of nightclubs, go fishing, hunting, camping, and, well, he would surely be better soon. Or so I hoped, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Eddie couldn't drink alcohol because of his medications. He didn't show any interest in doing any of the things I'd planned. He wanted to stay home, mostly in the living room with the curtains open during the day and the overhead lights on after dark. He would turn on the overhead lights, the 3 large floor lamps, and the television in the living room. Every meal he ate, he took to the living room, refusing to sit at the kitchen table, stating that it was too shadowy in there. One of the strangest things he did in his stay with me was to ask me to stand guard at the bathroom door every time he showered. And one time, I told him he was perfectly safe, and there was no reason for me to do this. He refused to take a shower. I thought he'd given up and take a shower after a few days, but he wouldn't. It went on for a week, and I stood at the bathroom door after that every time he took a shower. It was extremely uncomfortable for me, but what else could I do? About a month later, I'd given up on drawing him out of his shell. I left Eddie in the living room and went to bed during a nice little thunderstorm, looking forward to a restful night of sleep. At 3 the next morning, he woke me screaming hysterically. I ran for the stairs and realized the electricity was out and the storm was raging. Grabbing a flashlight off the foyer table, I entered the living room expecting anything at that point. Eddie was standing in the far corner, screaming, punching, kicking at nothing that I could see. And I yelled to him, and he seemed to wake from a trance-like state and blinked several times at me. "Did you see it, Stephen?" His voice trembled, and the terror in his eyes spooked me. I shook my head. "I didn't see anything, man. You had a nightmare, dude, come on." I motioned for him to come my way from the corner and back to the sofa. He refused to let me leave him alone the rest of the night, and the power came back on around 6. I had to leave for work, and the nightmares became worse for Eddie, and I slept less than ever. Sometimes I couldn't calm him at all. The episode had to fade on its own. His parents told me that's what he'd started doing at their house before he came to stay with me. The last week that Eddie stayed with me, he told me that he was being attacked by the Shadow Man, and that the Shadow Man wouldn't stop until he killed Eddie. And I scoffed, but I didn't say anything. "I need to move to someone else's house, Stephen. If I don't go, you'll start seeing him too. And then you'll be marked." Eddie bounced his legs up and down rapidly, shaking the whole sofa. "Eddie, man, I'm going to try to help you here. I'm trying to be nice about this." And I took a deep breath and said, "There is no Shadow Man." I shook my head and looked at him seriously. Eddie became animated, shaking his head, wagging his finger back and forth at me. "You're wrong. You shouldn't say that. He'll take it as a challenge." And the next day, Eddie went to stay with his oldest sister in the next town over. Though I was saddened by Eddie's failing mental state, I admit that I was happy about being alone in the house again. And I went to bed that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept expecting Eddie to wake me up screaming, even though he was gone. And I knew his outbursts had conditioned me to anticipate something bad happening after bedtime, so I fought the feeling. Just before my alarm sounded, I dozed off. The next night, I was sure I saw someone moving just outside my bedroom door. After searching the house, I went back to bed and slept for a while. And this became a nightly ritual for me. It went on for weeks that I would just go ahead and search the house before I went to bed. And I thought that would stop the occurrences. But that shadowy movement would happen just outside my bedroom door, at different times anyway. Then, the shadowy movement started happening inside my room. That first week, I would wake to the feeling that someone was in my room. Peering into the deep shadows from my bed, I would be startled to see movement. I started sleeping with the flashlight, and when I would wake, I would immediately turn on the flashlight and search the room, my heart thudding fast, a sickly sweat breaking out on my forehead and back, only to find that I was alone. I began to be fearful at bedtime. I bought a nightlight and installed it close to my door. It threw enough light that I could see that side of my room well, and it helped for 3 nights, and then the figure returned. I woke one night and saw this tall, slender shadow standing at the foot of my bed. I knew that if it was blocking the nightlight, it was a physical person, not a nightmare. And I grabbed my flashlight and came out of bed swinging at the thing. The figure evaporated. I turned on my overhead light and sat up the rest of the night, intermittently reading a book and watching a movie. The next day, I decided to do some research online. The amount of information was overwhelming. Lack of sleep had muddled my brain so that I had trouble putting the information together in any meaningful way. And I didn't sleep for 2 days. I researched and read all the material I could find on shadow people. I found every possible theory about what these entities are. The only thing I did not find was how to get rid of them. Reluctantly, I joined groups dedicated to shadow people encounters and chat rooms that offered relatively real-time help concerning the happenings. I'd had no idea shadow people were such a widespread phenomenon. The next time I slept, I woke to that sinister shadow at the foot of my bed again. This time, I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was lie prone, watching in horror as the figure moved slowly around to my side of the bed and leaned close to my face. It growled low, and then disappeared. I was frozen in horror. The thing had been at least 7 feet tall and had no face, and I started taking those cheap caffeine pills I could buy at the gas station down the road. I drank gallons of coffee to boost the effects of the pills, and after a few days, I fell asleep at my computer. As I sat in my chair, I woke to that now familiar feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't move. Terror swept through me. I knew what was getting ready to happen. The figure appeared in my peripheral and lingered there for a few seconds. And I fought to move my arm, my finger, my head, but nothing would happen. I was completely paralyzed as the humanish figure moved to my side. Again, it leaned down close to my face. I could feel its breath dancing across my overheated cheek and tickling my ear. Consciousness slipped away, and I'm sure I passed out. I bought energy drinks and bought stay alert pills that were not just caffeine. I'd been warned that they were dangerous my whole life, but I didn't care. I didn't want to sleep anymore, at least not until I figured out how to get rid of this shadow figure that was tormenting me. I started leaving on all the lights, and it wasn't lost on me how much like Eddie I had become. I actually started blaming Eddie for the appearance of the Shadow Man, and I never had any sort of supernatural experience until Eddie had stayed with me and scared the hell out of me a few times with his screaming and fighting episodes in the middle of the night. I was awake for 4 days before I finally slept again. I fell out with a movie playing on the television, and I woke to the TV being off. The power settings turns it off after 2 hours of inactivity, and the nightlight threw its smudge of light into the room, and the Shadow Man stood just inside the bedroom door. In my head, I screamed as loud as I could. Except in the real world, the awake world, I couldn't move or make a sound. I stared at the figure, wondering what it wanted from me. And it stared back at me with its no-face appearance. Its hands twitched at its sides and seemed to ball into fists at the end of those 2 long, eerily skinny arms. I had time to hope that it would turn and leave the room before its eyes appeared in that formless face. They were a mix between orange and red, and they pierced the darkness far better than that stupid little nightlight. Struggling against my paralysis, I got my toes to wiggle. Seeming to sense that I was coming out of the paralysis, the thing screamed with a voice like a rushing waterfall and crossed the room with the speed of light. My foot moved, and one of my hands. The shadow figure slowly creeped onto my bed. It was heavy. It straddled my waist and I tried to scream again, but nothing happened. I was helpless as this thing stretched out those long, curling shadow fingers towards my throat. Its red eyes transfixed me, and I couldn't look away as it started choking me. I thought I was going to die. And just then, my alarm clock sounded, and the thing disappeared. I sat up, choking and gasping for air. Since that morning, I've begun seeing the shadow figure during the daytime. I don't sleep at night anymore at all. I've started napping for 30 minutes at a time 3 times a day, usually in my truck and usually in busy parking lots. My own house has started to feel foreign to me. I can't be there long enough to start feeling comfortable for fear that I'll fall asleep. Today, I napped while on my lunch break, which has become normal for me. I was awakened when the bench seat was pressed down as if someone sat there. I wasn't paralyzed, and I couldn't see anything except an indentation in the seat. What if Eddie was right, and this thing has marked me for death? Is there a way to stop the shadow person, or will it end up killing me? And I hope I figure out how to stop it soon, because I'm so tired.